Good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest to outbrew the Magic world. Today we're continuing my 2023 year-end roundup extravaganza by bringing back old decks and new, brewing some just fun stuff up to finish the year as we look forward to next year, 2024, and the new content coming out. And as always, if you're interested, the deck list is going to be in the description below. Today we're looking at a deck that I did do for the channel a while back. It's a deck that's always had my heart as far as Izzet decks goes. And there's just some new cards that have made this deck worth it for me to come back to or think about again. And so I thought, why not do it? Today we're talking about Galazeth Prismari, a 4-mana 3/4 Elder Dragon that says when it enters the battlefield, we get a treasure. And then artifacts we control have tap, add a mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast an instant or a sorcery spell. So Galazeth is going to take any artifact we have and allow it to tap for mana in order to cast instant and sorcery spells. I think this is a really fun effect because not only are those treasures able to tap for mana without sacrificing themselves for instant sorceries, but we get to use things like clues or other artifact tokens, food, what have you, to tap for mana and use them to play our spells. Our goal is going to be to try to get as many tokens and treasures as we can, whether they're artifact creatures, treasures, clues, food, or what have you, and lead up into either casting big spells dealing damage to our opponent or animating all of those artifacts into creatures. I think those are the two main routes we're going to go to try to end the game. So let's talk about the deck, kind of some key cards, what I think could be fun, and then at the end we'll do some gold fishing like normal. So I think part of the easy part when we think about Galazeth is going to be making artifacts, right? We need artifacts in order to tap with its ability. And we have something like Saheeli Sublime Artificer, which does a great job. And we have a couple of these effects where whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we make a 1/1 Servo Artifact creature token. Third Path Iconoclast is something very different, except it makes us a 1/1 Soldier Artifact creature token. And these are important because not only are they creatures that we can use to attack, block, or what have you, but they are also creatures that tap for mana for the purposes of our spells. We have something like a caddying manufacturer, so every time we would make a treasure, instead we make a clue, food, and treasure instead. And that's great because then all of those are going to count for mana on future turns. We're playing spells like Brass's Bounty to make us a ton of treasures at once, equal to the number of lands we have. We have a card draw like Big Score, Unexpected Windfall, Prismari Command, and Seize the Spoils, that all will make us a treasure. Big Score and Unexpected Windfall make 2. Now for 3 of those 4, we have to pitch a card in order to do it. Prismari Command is actually a draw 2, discard 2, kind of like a Faithless Looting. But these effects are going to gain us treasures and draw us cards, get into our win cons, get into our expected cards that we want to see in order so we can start putting together the basis for our end game. And we're playing something like Trail of Evidence. Whenever we cast an instant sorcery, we make a clue, which again we can tap later for mana. And then trying out Heaven Sent from the Doctor Who set on Saga Marker 1 and 2, we investigate. And then the third one, we deal damage to everybody, each opponent, and then if our opponent has 0 or less life, we draw 7 cards. Otherwise, we can exile it and cast it again. So this is just going to loop around, getting us more clues each turn, allowing us to pick up, kind of pick up that board of artifacts as we push toward the mid game. Okay, so like I said, the 2 goals of our deck, one is going to be big spells or big damage. The second is going to be animating our artifacts or casting a bunch of spells. So let's go down the big spells route, and we're going to get to try to play and have some fun with things like Crackle with Power and Giant Inferno. There's both spells that can do a ton of damage. Crackle with Power deals 5 times X damage to each up to X targets, and Giant's Inferno does X damage to each up to 3 targets. So Jai is perfect in that because it can deal it to all 3 of our opponents. Crackle with Power, we can just choose as many targets as we want up to X, but deal a ton of damage. And these are ways that we can potentially end the game with 1 spell. It's not in the list, but when the list goes live, I'm also going to add in Comet Storm, another spell that does a very similar type of effect. But the difference with Comet Storm is we pay X double red, and we choose target creature or player, and then choose another target creature or player for each time it's kicked, and it deals X damage to each of them. The multi-kickers 1. So in order to hit all 3 of our opponents, we'd have to pay 2 into the multi-kicker, and then pay any amount of X we want, and we're going to deal damage to all 3 of those targets. I realized that wasn't in there, and that needs to be in there, so we'll rectify that later. But again, these are the kind of big red spells that can deal damage to all of our opponents and help us end the game. We're also going to try to use things like Access Denied and Spell Swindle to try to stop our opponents gain benefit. Both of them say we're going to counter target spell and then make X of a particular token depending on that spell's mana value. Spell Swindle makes them as treasures, and Access Denied makes them as 1/1 Thopters. So again, the point is wait for our opponents to cast a bigger spell, their commander, or something big, counter it, get a bunch of things that should hopefully skyrocket us forward. Now, a card that helps us do that and is going to help us allow that mana to be up is something like Unwinding Clock, to untap all of our artifacts during each of the player's untap step. This will allow us to keep removal and other things up because all of these artifacts that we're tapping for mana are going to untap, and then we can do that on our opponent's turn. So that's going to allow us to still interact with our opponents while still playing our game plan. And we could probably play a lot more counterplay than I'm playing in the deck, but I think it's important to play some, and I think just the fact that we're untapping all of it is going to have our opponents have to think twice about what we might have and how we might be able to interact with them, over the course of a game as we're threatening having all this untapped mana. But okay, we talked about the big damage spells as a way to end the game. Let's talk about animating all of our artifacts. We have Cyberdrive Awakener. It says when it comes in until end of turn, each non-creature artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/4, and it gives all of our artifact creatures creatures flying. What this is going to do, just like a spell like Rise and Shine, is going to turn all those non-creature artifacts into creatures, and our opponents have to deal with a massive board of creatures. Of course, for Cyberdrive, it's going to put them all in the air, which is going to make them even harder for our opponents. But even just Rise and Shine is going to animate our entire board and could just run over a couple players outright to help us win the game that way. We have something like Hellkite Tyrant, beginning of our upkeep. If we have 20 more artifacts, we win the game. And we can get this and a couple of the other dragons on our deck with Magda, who allows us to just sack 5 treasures and go get a dragon. Cool part is that is at instant speed, so if we know we have the amount of artifacts we need, we can actually use Magda's effect at that end step before our turn, get the Hellkite Tyrant, and untap and win the game that way is a cheeky way to get in for some game ending that way. And then Mechanized Production, we enchant an artifact we control. At the beginning of our upkeep, we make one of those, and then if we control 8 or more artifacts with the same name as one another, we win the game. This is not going to be very hard with the amount of cards in our deck that make treasures, but we do have some of the things that make clues and other things like that. I don't think it's going to be very hard to win with Mechanized Production, but I like it because it's going to be a great way to help us close out the game, especially if we get into pretty combat heavy matchups where we're not going to be able to win by just picking people off, or maybe we can't get to these big spell wins. We can get there with the Mechanized Production. But that's more or less basically how the deck's going to work. I think how it's going to function. I think every other card in the deck is going to be your preference on what you like. I have a couple extra turn spells in here. Some people don't like that. You could take those out, run some more counterplay if you want to. But as I've said before on the show, not every deck's perfect. And even if all of our decks on first creation are going to be perfect. And there's some cards I really wanted to put in. I just couldn't find the spot for. I think they're worth mentioning. So if you were going to test a deck like this, you could start looking into them. The first is Ancient Copper Dragon, a very expensive dragon in its own right. 6 mana, 6/5. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you roll a d20 and make that many treasures. I think Copper Dragon is more than worth playing, right? We have the Magda engine if we can find it, so we will be able to search it out, or it's just a great creature in its own right. The card just holds a pretty hefty price tag, and at the moment, it would be like an eighth of our deck cost. So I can understand why some people wouldn't want to pay that. It'd be the same with something like Dockside. They're so expensive at the moment, although they're great for the deck. It was just tough for me to recommend asking you to play it when it's an eighth of the deck of the cost. Reality Ship seems like a really cool card. Look at the top card of our library at any time, and when it's attached to something, we can play lands and cast spells off the top of our library. That just seems great. It seems really good. I want to try to keep as many spots in the deck for non-creature spells as possible, since all of our effects trigger off us casting them. It was tough for me to put this in over some other creatures that I really wanted. And then a couple cards down here, Arcane Denial for a little bit more counterplay. This and another counterspell or two of your choice could come in handy, especially if we get that Unwinding Clock set up. You can always throw in something like Word of Invention to make sure that you really get the Unwinding Clock, and you always have it available. And then Cycrift, just another bit of play for our opponents, trying to slow them down and and take care of their board. I can't remember if War of Invention is in the list. It's not. So that would be another example of a card where you could add that to go get something. And the cool part about War of Invention is you can use your artifacts to help pay the cost. So if we have a couple treasures out, we can tap them to help get that unwinding clock out and ready to go. But let's do a quick goldfish of Galazeth. This is something fun because it lets us talk through the ideas and what we're trying to do. Turn one here, my play probably would have been the Shivan Reef. But here we see an Urza Saga, so I have no problem absolutely slamming that guy down. Turn 2, we get our second counter on that, and I think I would throw down this training center probably, and I think it makes more sense to just start getting our mana rocks down here rather than making that construct. Turn 3, we're going to tap this guy before it sacrifices, getting a mana in the process. Floating one, and I think we'll just go get the Soul Ring. We don't see it in our hand, and I know there are some other artifacts we can probably go get, but I think I'm gonna go get the Soul Ring whenever I can find it here in the list. This is just gonna allow us to get more mana out this turn. We have one floating, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana this turn before we play our land. Play our land, giving us 6 mana this turn. We could dump Galazeth. We could also get the Storm the Vault and Izzet Signet down. So I'd say I would probably get the Signet down and then get Galazeth out just to get that treasure and get our game plan started. This turn we can play Rivendell now that we have a legendary creature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana. We can play the Vault. We can play the Rain of Riches, which is a really fun card. Makes us treasures, and then every spell we cast with mana from a treasure gives us Cascade. I'm not 100% sure on... It says when mana from a treasure was spent to cast. I'm thinking it means sacrificing a treasure, but I could be wrong. It could mean with Galazeth's ability, if we tap a treasure for mana, it could count because you're tapping the treasure for an actual mana, because with Galazeth's ability, you're giving it that ability. So I would think with Rain of Riches that would work without having to sacrifice the treasures. I hope I'm right, but if I'm wrong, that means you just sacrifice one treasure a turn to get... to get the 1 per turn. But I would probably do that. That nets us a couple more treasures. We could solve the equation, get something like Crackle with Power that into our hand, have it ready to go. We could get it to get some things to help us keep continuing our board. That might be my play. I'm just not 100% sure what I would go get. Next turn we see Zoran here to get some more treasures. Play that Spire of Industry. We could Storm the Vault so that we can start hitting our opponents to make treasures. I like this spot. We have a little bit of removal. We have lots of treasures we're making, and I think we can turn this into a good endgame board state. But let me know what you guys think of Galazeth down in the comments below. This is a deck that, again, I loved in the past. I think it's a really fun deck, and it allows you to kind of take those treasures and turn them into playing really fun things. This deck is a very close second to Ovika for me, and is a deck I would actually want to play. I like this because it adds those dragons. Of course, I love my dragons, and to me, it's a good mix of artifacts and spells, which I think is what you want when you're in blue and red. But let me know down in the comment section below. I'd love to have a discussion with you. I'm going to cut one more card so that we can... get that Comet Storm in, because I think that's going to be important, and I will catch you guys next time.